Hello, this is ASEAN Movie Pulse Talks number 3. I'm here with Rouven, Linnarz and Tom Wilmot. And today we're going to speak about Shinya Tsukamoto's Killing, just one movie this time. You can say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, great. So let's start with you, Rouven. Can you tell us a bit what the movie is about?
Yeah, certainly. I'll try my very best. Shinya Tsukamoto's Killing takes place in the 19th century during the Edo period. And it deals with a young samurai, a ronin called Mukonoshin. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. And he is currently boarding in a small village, which is mostly populated by farmers. And he has made a living there for quite some time there, helping out with the harvesting. And there is not sure if you can call it an affair, but there is some sort of romance going on with one of the farmer's daughters, and her brother is being taught by Mokonoshin in the art of fighting, in the art of sword fighting. So this is pretty much an idyllic life for him until another samurai, I think he's also a ronin, but I'm not quite sure. Another samurai by the name of Sawamura, by the way, played by Tsukamoto himself, arrives at one point, and he makes quite an impression. He has a duel with another samurai, and he also notices that Mukonoshin has quite some skills, and he would like to win him over to join him on a mission to fight for the shogun somewhere, and also the farmer's son. He should also come. At the same time, a band of thieves or thugs or ronins, I'm not sure, but I think a band of thieves it is, arrives, and the farmers, because they are weak and helpless, at least that's what they say, they are afraid of these, and they would like very much, before the samurai go to whatever it is they're doing, to protect them. However, while the first encounter with the thugs or with the thieves is actually quite diplomatic, they turn out to be, well, quite okay. They say we only punish those who deserve it. But then suddenly things become quite violent when the farmer's son provokes these band of thieves, and then things start to become violent, bloody, and that's as far as I would like to go without spoiling everything.
Okay.
What do you think about Killing, Tom?
I love Killing. So it was the last Tsukamoto film that I watched, sort of on a chain of watching them. I sort of binged a bunch of them last summer, and I would have said at that time that it was my second or third favorite Tsukamoto film, but I think after rewatching it again, it might be my favorite, topping Tokyo Fist. I just think there's so much going on underneath what is on paper a really simple premise, and it's still got all of those trademark Tsukamoto sort of features where it's very primal. It's very much about the synergy between man and metal to make some kind of weapon, even away from the sort of cyberpunk aesthetics of Tetsuo and stuff like that. I think it's fantastic.
Well, actually, I have to say that currently it is my favorite Tsukamoto film. I really loved it. I think this is one of the best films I've seen in the last years. But okay, I feel the main element of the film is how Tsukamoto deconstructs the whole concept of Bushido. According to Bushido and the way samurais were depicted on screen, at least in the past, samurais are these noble warriors that are heroes, definite heroes. They are always brave, and essentially they cannot do anything wrong. They are like perfect and whatnot, But in this case, this is a more realistic approach towards the whole concept of samurai, particularly in the era the film takes place, which is actually in an era where the whole concept of the samurais has completely declined. As Japan was getting into a new era, the whole concept of Bushido was deleted, let's say. And in this case, it becomes quite obvious how these people are not actually heroes, but essentially killing machines. I think this is this is one of the main comments in the film. Rouven?
Before we actually said that we're going to focus on killing, we actually had 3 films in mind for this podcast or for this video. I'm mentioning this because the film that he did before that, Fires on the Plane, is actually, or could be, or at least I see it that way, could be a prequel to this one in terms of themes. Because it's also about turning a person who is actually, or who thinks he's civilized and fires on the plane. It's an author. Here it is someone who is actually trying to be the good guy. He's trying to be diplomatic with the band of thieves. He's trying to solve everything quite peacefully in a sort of way. He's trying to live a sort of tranquil life away from this killing. And I think he's actually, and he hasn't even killed before, has he? I think Sawamura at one point says, I have to force you to become a killer. Become a killer again. And this is where this last act takes place, which is what Tom just mentioned, this symbiosis, where he becomes one with the sword, with the killing machine. He becomes one with the sword. It becomes this perfect killing machine.
So the thing is as well, I would say that with where it ends up as well, sort of with him almost bonding with his sword and in that way, it's a contrast to a lot of Tsukamoto's earlier work, where I mean, at the end of Tetsuo Iron Man, I don't know, at least for me, it's kind of a sort of triumphant and sort of energized ending, just kind of how kinetic it is and everything. Whereas at the end of Killing, it's devastating. I mean, no one really wins, and there's no feeling of triumph in the fact that he's sort of bonded with his weapon and has become this sort of killer machine. It's almost like he's lost something that he was trying really hard to keep along the way.
Do you think that because Bushido deals, as far as I understand, Bushido deals with mastering the art of, deals with mastering your weapon, not necessarily the art of killing, but mastering your weapon. But here it's, I think these odds have changed, because you don't actually know, it's all in every Tsukamoto film, you don't actually know who is mastering whom. Is the machine the one that is actually the master of the person, or is the person actually the master of, the weapon? What do you think about that? Is he actually, what is this? I mean, is he dependent on the sword or vice versa?
I mean, it depends really, because the film is so ambiguous in terms of, purposely ambiguous in terms of whether the violence is good or bad, whether the sort of incidents that they've incited throughout the film through violence, were they worth it or not? And I mean, at the end, it's still kind of unclear to me. I would say it's a mixture of the fact that his almost primal instincts sort of taking over and him almost giving in, but he is kind of giving in to the sword in some way, in because he has the skill. Mokonoshe, throughout the film, you see him sparring and you see the fact that he's a very capable swordsman, but he doesn't have that, literally the killer instinct that he needs. Whereas come the end, there's that really great shot just before Sawamura goes to strike him, and he kind of focuses in on the sword, and it's almost like a moment of realization of like, that is what he needs to let himself go to. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, thinking about it now.
I think in general, what the film says also, it's like those people, I mean, the peasants, they live in, even the young protagonist, they are not, as Tom said, they are not prone to violence. They don't exactly need it, but they also don't know it at all. But what the film seems to say is that in this particular era, violence actually caught up with the people, either they wanted or not. I think this is one of the key comments of the film, that despite if you want violence at particular times, you are being sucked into it. And you can see in the film that at one point the cycle of violence begins, and you see how it ends in the film. Let's not spoil the whole thing, but it never actually ends until there are so many victims. I feel that the title of the film actually speaks volumes about what it is about. And Samurai and Bushido, which of course, as Rouven said, Bushido involves the concept of swordsmanship, but also involves some things like being completely dedicated to your lord, and having a set of values that you follow no matter what. And all of these are deconstructed in the film, which shows that essentially what samurais were about was about violence and killing. This is what I feel about the film.
No, totally. And I totally agree with the title as well. I mean, it's quite a blunt title, just killing, like that's it. And I think the actual Japanese title, if I'm not mistaken, ends with like a comma. It's kind of like killing and then comma, as if like there's something to follow it. Like there's no moral question attached to it. It's kind of up to you to make up your mind
exactly
whether it's right or wrong. It's just a fact of the movie, and there's an awful lot of killing in the movie.
When I watched this for now the third time, I actually had my thinking: is it really about this Bushido in a way? When we think about Kurosawa films, it's always about this code of honor, this Bushido, which actually serves the rulers quite well, because they have actually warriors. They don't question anything. They have this code, and they have to honor it. They don't have a choice. And this is something that I think Tsukamoto does quite well. He actually asks, for example, is he forced to kill others, or is he acting out of his own free will? Which, Tom, just you mentioned. Is he actually a killing machine by nature? Does he give in at the end? And this was one of the questions I asked myself, because, as you said, it's quite a blunt title. Just the act of killing. But is the act of killing something that he wants and he represses? Because as much as we talk about Bushido and any other themes, this is a film that deals a lot with repression, also sexual repression, by the way.
Oh, definitely.
And is he repressing something, or is he forced? Because both of these things are in the film. You remember Sawamura actually asks him several times, hey, do you want to actually use your sword, or something like this, he says. Or at some point he's actually asked quite provocatively, is your sword just decorative, at one point?
Yeah, I think that's from Yu asks if it's just decorative, because he's it's obviously there's an act of vengeance where there's a question of whether it should be carried out later in the film, and she's sort of scolding him and saying, is it just a decorative piece that you just walk around with, or you're actually going to use it for anything?
Sorry,
Tom, go on. No, you continue, please.
Okay, so I also think that the film shows that under certain circumstances, maybe all people can become killers. I think that is one of the points of the film, because the young protagonist doesn't want to be a killer in essence. He wants to be a hero, but he doesn't understand the whole concept of war. But when the circumstances arise, essentially he has to become a killer. This is one of the points of the film. And you can say that the character Tsukamoto plays is like, I feel like this concept that you have an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and Tsukamoto's character is definitely the devil, because he's actually pushing him to become a killer in a very cunning way, I can say. Also, I feel another point the film makes is about the role peasants played in this whole thing, this war game essentially that samurai played. They are just there to be killed and exploited. I think this is one of the points the film makes. There are the warriors, samurais, who have their wars, and then there are the peasants who have to work the earth or whatever and provide for the samurai. But when the time comes, they are just a source that provides something from the samurai.
Well, I think it's interesting considering the time period that the film is set in as well, and I would strongly recommend anyone listening to try and check out the Tom Mez audio commentary on the Third Window release of the film, because he goes a lot into the sort of the history of the period and especially like the roles that peasants played in it. And I mean, Mokonoshe, sorry, he is training Ichisuke, who is the farm boy who he's sort of boarding with. And it's like that was very uncommon generally for, well, I mean, not just uncommon, it was sort of unheard of for someone of a lower class to be training and taking a step into the warrior class. But given the time period and given that the Tokugawa shogunate was sort of collapsing, it kind of showed how desperate the samurai were to sort of grasp onto the power that they had in the class system. But yeah, it's exactly like you say, like at the end of it, they still didn't think very highly of the peasantry, and it was just sort of a means to an end to them that didn't really work out.
Just a note, the film takes place mid-19th century. It's during the negotiations with the Americans, which the negotiations that essentially ended the samurai period for Japan and introduced her to, let's say, modernity. Just a note. Rouven?
Actually have a quite different reading to the farmers. I actually think they are the villains in this film because they are the ones who, or let's start different. When you think of the peasants in, let's say, for example, the Zatoichi films or the Kurosawa films, they are always those who are in need of protection. They are always the ones who, as you said, they provide for the samurai because of the social hierarchy, I guess. And there is a clear understanding of these sort of roles. There is a clear understanding also in Killing, but the way they use the samurai, or in this case the Ronin, or let's say instrumentalize the samurai as a means to protect them from a very, let's say, vague fear that they have, that's quite interesting. And I think that is something that transcends the period setting, because Tsukamoto said he wanted, in the interview that we did with him, or I did with him at Nippon Connection 2019, he said he wanted to use a period setting in order to say something about current times. And in this context, it's about how fear controls people and who they are forcing to do the, in this case, the dirty work for them. Because the peasants here are not as, let's say, positive or neutral as they were in Zatoichi films or in Kurosawa films. They are quite exploitative in a way. They are quite cunning and they're quite villainous at some point, or at least manipulative.
Yeah, really? Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
So I think this is okay. It's not to the level of, let's say, the peasants in Seven Samurai who have this master plan from the beginning, but there is this aspect in the film also. But I think the way it is presented, it also says that they are forced to act this way. They have the choice of being somewhat cunning and, let's say, exploiting those who can protect them, because otherwise they will just die. These are their two options. I don't think they do it for anything. They have any ulterior motive. This is what I feel about them. Tom, you want to say something?
No, I would say I think the peasants are totally the victims in the film, just because the inciting incident with they clearly have a fear of I agree, they definitely have a fear of the samurai class and the warrior class, just as when the bandits or Ronin, or it's kind of ambiguous whether they're completely bad guys as well, the group that rolls in, when they do turn up into the village, there's a clear fear there of what might happen. But I mean, the guy that Mokonoshe is boarding with, I mean, he says like, don't make eye contact with them, like just leave it because it will cause problems for us. And it's only really after there's a retaliation after Sawamura's attack on them, I guess, that's off screen, that then they kind of, you in particular, is sort of pining for revenge and wanting Mokonoshe to act. But I would say initially, the peasants are just sort of, again, they're just kind of pawns in this game that the samurai and the warrior class are playing between themselves. They're just kind of caught in the crossfire.
I think they are isolated in a way. I think this is something that very few of the samurai films or period films actually touch upon. That even though there is a social hierarchy, there is a system, there is a ruler, but these rulers, they always seem very vague. They're always distant. They're always sending someone who's preserving the order, but they're always distant. This is why. I mean, I'm not saying they are the villains because they want to be the villains, but because they are forced to be this way. They are forced to be this cunning, this exploitative, this manipulative. Otherwise, as you said, they would wither and die. But again, this fear of the band of thieves, that they have never spoken to, they are just judging because of their appearance, which is, well, rather violent to be honest.
Yeah, there's a good gag in the film about that.
But again, this is the foundation for this sort of violence, this fear, this vague fear that you have of the other, of this person that you don't know, that you think he might be acting violently. And this is when the killing starts, or when the killing, yeah.
No, I agree as well, because especially in terms of the peasants, I guess, not having a grasp of the broader sort of political situation and stuff. There's that great moment towards the beginning where Sawamura kind of offers to Ichisuke for him to come along as like a reserve warrior, and his sister, says to him, like, do you even know what the situation is? Do you have any idea who you're even going to fight? And he hasn't got a clue. He's just kind of enticed with this idea of going and sort of raising his social stature, and
By the way, Panos. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. What I think is also the concept of how victimized the peasants were at the time. I think it's mostly portrayed by the character of Yu. I think she's the victim in this thing that nothing is her fault for what is happening. Okay, until the point, at least, until the initial tragedy, she's just in love with someone and she wants what she wants. But she is a victim. I think there's no doubt about it. And also, as I'm talking about you, I'm also thinking her character also represents, in a way, the concept of love in such a setting. That essentially Tsukamoto seems to say that there is no room for love in this setting. Love, in this case, is a burden, and as another sentiment that actually leads to despair. This is what I feel is portrayed in the film. I don't know what you think.
I think there are two very interesting shots, which also have to do with this idea of the repression of love, and also the repression of sexuality, and also linked to what we said before, this sort of fetish with the sword that Tsukamoto uses many times in the film with close-ups. There is this moment when he's pushing his hand outside the wooden wall of his hut where he lives, and he knows that Yu is outside, and he's sort of reaching out for her, but of course he can't reach out completely, and she bites his finger, I think his index finger, I think it is, And this is mirrored later on when he is biting the sword of one of the thieves. You remember? And this very much this is leads me to believe that there is no, as you said, there is no love, there is no human relationship, because Bushido forbids that. The only relationship you are supposed to have is with the metal, is with the sword, or with the act of killing, to be honest. Which this is quite one of the bleakest statements that Tsukamoto has made.
No, I do think that the relationship between sexual repression, love, and violence in the film, it's all very interlinked. I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that Yu loves Mokonoshe so much so as she sees him as a strong masculine figure because of his samurai status, but there is a shift. I suppose she kind of has a wandering eye when Sawamura turns up and he's kind of taking decisive violent action. There's definitely a shift in her attraction, I would say. And then there's that, it's kind of epitomized in that cave scene, that cave confrontation, where Mokonoshe is still trying to be sort of pacifist, and he uses a log to fight rather than his sword, but ultimately he fails, and Yu is attacked. But then Sawamura comes in, and he's actually kind of killing the people there, and he's kind of got the gusto, I guess you could say. There's definitely a shift in her affections around that time, and even a little bit before that. So I'm not even sure that I go as far as to say that she loves him in the first place. It's more of just like this attraction to the violence.
I think I agree with that statement. I wouldn't go so far as to call it love either. I'd say there's a definite attraction to them, maybe even, well, no, strike the maybe, a sexual attraction between those two, which is repressed because of the code. And when this, the scene that you mentioned, Tom, when this happens, when he proves to be impotent in more than one way, because he can't fight off the thieves, he has proven to be impotent in more than one way, because throughout the film he proves to be he shows that he's an efficient warrior, he shows that he's an efficient sword fighter, but when it's time to act, he's always impotent. He can't act, at least not the way Sawamura acts.
Yeah, and there are those kind of sequences where I suppose on a first watch you might see them as quite strange, where Mokonoshe appears to be masturbating outside of the hut, and it's usually when he's kind of quite stressed about this idea of killing and having to be sort of violently engaged in something. And I think Sawamura later on, he says something like, without your sword is worthless without using it, or something like that. There's definitely some kind of phallic connection there.
Oh yeah, I was actually reminded of the scene. I'm not sure if it was Tetsuo the Iron Man or the Bullet Man, where you remember when the scene when this person has a power drill instead of a penis?
Yes.
I was actually reminded of that.
Everyone remembers that.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure which movie it was. I was actually reminded of that when there is this scene when his Mokonoshin is so wounded, and this is when he feels that he is forced to kill or forced to act, and he violently masturbates. I can't say it otherwise, and that reminded me very much of that scene when,
it's just after. It's just after he goes on that rant where he's saying, like, I want to be able to kill, and he just kind of says it over and over and over again. It's just again, the, like you said, violent masturbation scene. It's kind of just a sign of his frustration generally, just not being able to kind of get over the line, you could say.
Okay. So another one of the best traits of the film, I also feel, is the way that Tsukamoto induces the whole narrative with a sense of danger. I don't know if you feel it like, but I felt from the initial scene that you have the sense that something bad will happen. This is, you know, when okay, the first samurai comes, you know, this sense is intensified a bit, and then when the band of samurais come, the Ronins, this sense is intensified even more, and you feel this thing that something bad is going to happen, and then comes, let's say, I feel that the peak of this sense is the cave scene, because this is Tsukamoto. It also counts in the feeling that you have that something very violent would happen, because this is Tsukamoto and you know that something violent would happen. All his movies are violent like that. And this finds its peak in the cave scene, which is, I feel, both the most impressive, the most violent, and the most exploitative, let's say, in the whole film. What do you think, Tom?
On an initial watch, I would have described that cave scene and Sawamura's actions as being kind of like gloriously violent. Like it is kind of an explosion of violence, from the blood splurts to some of the just very grotesque imagery and stuff. But I mean, upon rewatching it, and throughout the film generally, there's no real glorification of violence. It's very blunt and grounded and unsavory, and you know, for as much as I mean, in terms of technically how the scene is shot, and it's very quick cuts and this kind of kinetic camera movement, it's very engaging. But in terms of where it leaves you feeling after watching it, it doesn't feel like a triumph. It doesn't feel like it's definitely a release, but it's not a very welcome one. And it kind of, for me, goes with the theme of the film in general, where I think Tsukamoto's stance at the end of it is just that violence, while ambiguous, I feel that he presents it as violence isn't really the solution. It's only going to breed more. And like you said, there's this feeling throughout the whole film that there's this sort of inevitability about something bad happening. But I think that's because you know just how the violence will escalate and that it will only end with everyone, or at least a lot of people, ending up dead.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, as Rouven mentioned before in the fires on the plane, Tsukamoto does this very impressive thing that he uses intense violence to show a message that is actually anti-violence, as you just mentioned. I feel this is what you get from the film, that there is no glorification. Violence doesn't suit anything. There is no solution that provided by violence. I don't know, Rouven?
I think what Tsukamoto does in this film, as he did in basically every film that I have seen of him, is he describes a transition, which you said is a sense of danger. There is a situation in every Tsukamoto film, which is sort of the ideal, or let's say the routine. For example, the salaryman in the Tetsuo films, or the family situation. I think it was the Bullet Man, which is then destroyed because of violence. I think the most impressive time I've seen this is in Bullet Ballet, where this ideal or what is life of someone is destroyed because of gun violence. I think this is the first time I've seen it, and it's quite impressively. And he describes a transition into this violent person, or a person who is defined by violence. And this is, I think, this not just the sense of danger, but the sense of inevitability, which is also quite ironic, because as much as the people like Mukonoshin fight the urge to become violent, the more difficult it becomes for them to, let's say, get away from that.
Yeah,
I mean, even the ending of Fires on the Plane, it's not a happy ending.
no.
Even if he's back in Tokyo,
Yeah.
Don't feel that he has escaped. And
No.
the same thing for Mukonoshin. You don't get the feeling that he can escape the violence that is coming to him. And I think he has a realization of that as well, Well, for example, the first time when he sees Sawamura having this duel, the first time when he sees blood, he turns away and leaves the scene, which somewhat hints at or refers to the realization that this is something that I will do as well in the near future. And he's turning away, trying to turn his back on the inevitable. But as much as he tries to get away from it, the closer he gets.
No, I totally agree as well, and especially in terms of the way violence ends up being represented at the end of both Fires on the Plain and Killing. I mean, in the early Tsukamoto films in his early career, it's almost used violence like it's kind of an awakening for some of the characters. These characters are living in kind of this monotonous kind of city environment, whereas his past two films, the violence is almost the characters are trying to push away from it, you know, rather than it being this kind of like awakening, rather than it kind of enlightening them to some kind of realization or some kind of lifestyle, or, you know, it's something that's kind of haunting them and something that they're trying to actively push away from but can't, whether it be through circumstance or, I don't know, just natural urges.
I agree. I think that happened even in Tokyo Fist that you mentioned earlier, which is also, I think this is very ambivalent, where violence is a sort of awakening moment, but at the same time, this person is trying to get away from it. I think this is perhaps where this shift in the way Tsukamoto treats violence has done or took place.
No.
Okay, I guess we talked enough about Killing. This is all the time that we have. As far as I can see, that we could talk a few more hours about the film. There's so much to talk about. We didn't even touch the technical aspect, but maybe on another occasion. So
just as a very quick side note, it is a stunning film. Like it's probably one of his most cinematic to date, if not the most cinematic. So
yeah, I think one of the best uses of digital camera we have seen in the latest years. It's really impressive. Okay,
and
I guess.
And I think also an impressive display of what Tsukamoto can do as an actor.
Definitely.
His performance as Sawamura is incredible. It's absolutely great. And I mean, this is the same year he did Silence with Martin Scorsese, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think this is very much as.
I believe that was 2016.
Was it 2016? All right.
It's not far off though. It's a similar era of very different characters.
That is true, but both very incredible performances on the same level. As much credit as he gets as being a director, we should also give him some credit as being an actor.
Definitely.
Okay, I guess that was As a Movie Pals Talks number 3 from Panos, Rouven, and Tom. Bye, and see you next week, probably.
Bye.
Take it easy.